We've got some tremendous questions today. The main one is on sweet versus savory pies. Thanks for joining us today on Questions and Answers with James Townsend and Son. The first question today comes from Essen961. It's from the most recent episode here with the beefsteak pie. What is the effect of ash on the Dutch oven? Doesn't that induce rust? How do you maintain a Dutch oven which you use with charcoal? Well, rust is just the action of water and air with the iron, and no matter what you do in a Dutch oven used in circumstances like this, it's likely going to rust. Even just moisture in the air is going to cause the outside of your Dutch oven to rust, because you can't season the outside of a Dutch oven when it's used in this way, because the coals will just burn the seasoning right off of the very outside layer. So, you're just going to have to deal with a little bit of rust that you're going to get. You could try using oil on the outside of it, but I really don't recommend that. It's going to burn off anyway. Here's a comment that just came in on the channel itself. It's from Spiff the Magnificent. Have you ever made a vegetarian main course dish that's period? Personally, I'm a meat eater, but I know it's going to come up, and I'd like to have a dish of this sort in my arsenal. If you go back in the archives, you will find an episode I did called Vegetarian Pie, I believe. It's from probably season 2 or 3. That is a vegetarian dish. We've done other ones that were kind of main dishes. If you look at the little primitive cookery cookbook, that is mainly vegetarian type dishes. Sometimes they'll use eggs and butter, but mostly it's inexpensive dishes that don't have meat in them. That's a great resource for looking for that kind of a recipe. If you're interested, I'll put a link down in the description section of this video. Here's a question that came in on the baked beans episode. It's C. Ray Burke. Love the vids, keep them coming. Question: just how hot does the earthen oven get in the distance around it? I'm thinking of building one in my small side yard in Brooklyn, New York, and was wondering if the surroundings and rising heat would cause problems with my house. Really the heat issue is mostly where the opening is, the door of the oven, because when you're firing the oven, fire comes out of the door. It can get very hot right at the door section. But the rest of the oven, around the sides and the back and even the top, really don't get that hot. Generally, you can put your hand on the oven even at cooking temperatures, at least in the beginning. It's generally not that hot. So the door is really, if you face the door away from your house and the roof, isn't high enough away from the door, really shouldn't be a problem. Here's another one from the most recent episode with the beefsteak pie. This is Scott Worthington. Watching you assemble the layers, I thought some fresh mushrooms would be a great addition. Maybe not authentic, though I'll bet cooks of the time altered recipes to their preference. Looks delicious. Yes, these recipes are all suggestions. The author of the cookbook expected cooks in the time period to make alterations with, variations with depending on what you had on hand or what you liked. And fresh mushrooms would probably be excellent in this. Although if you're using fresh mushrooms, you might want to cut back on the liquids, because the mushrooms bring a lot of liquids in with them. And here's a great question from Janie Williams on that same episode. She says, you never said how long you cooked this. And we just went back through the episode and went, yes, we never said how long we cooked it. I guess we were waiting for that yummy pie to come out and eat it. So we forgot to tell you. Because it's cooking at a rather low temperature, 300 degrees or so, you want to cook it quite a while, 2 or 3 hours, and that will make it nice and tender. Here's an interesting question from Ben Zarzicki. It's way back when we did the French toast, the Pan Perdue episode. This recipe calls for sugar. Was granulated sugar like what we use today available in the 18th century, or did they use other sweeteners like honey and molasses? Well, they likely would have used honey and molasses in the time period, although this recipe calls for sugar. And they had sugar, but not granulated sugar like we would expect it. The sugars came in cones, loaf sugar, and you had to grind it off with sugar nippers and then mash it up in a mortar and pestle to make it anything like granulated sugar. But they did have sugar. They used it quite often. Here is a comment from the Making Mushroom Ketchup episode. This is Jimmy Mead. Great video, John. How long will the dried mushrooms be good for? And what would be the best way to store the dried portion? Well, you want to keep it dry. And because it's got salt in it and other things, and if you keep it dry, it'll last virtually forever. If you keep it out of sunlight and you keep it dry. We usually keep it in a little tin. And it's great stuff, and it will last for basically forever. Here's a good one from Mark Miles on this beefsteak pie. He says, "Hi there, John. I adore pie making. My favorite meal is in fact a meat pie, but I always use a bottom crust. I love how simplistic yet effective this recipe is. Can I make the same pie but with a bottom crust?" Yeah, it should work out just fine. You probably won't need to alter the recipe at all to put a bottom crust in this. And if you try it, make sure to tell us about it in the comments section. Thank you so much. This one came in on the last Q&A. This is Wanketa. It says, "John, if you don't mind my asking, what is your career educational background that makes you such a good instructor and video presenter?" And then she says, "I love learning from your videos, and you make it so easy to do." Well, thank you for the very kind comments. And my background is, I don't have a background in education or career. I just like to do this. It's all self-taught and lots of years of making YouTube videos, I guess. Thank you for that great comment. And here's the main question. It's from Mateo Highland. It's also from the beefsteak pie recipe episode. He says, "Were sweet pies as popular as savory pies at the time?" You know, it's an interesting question, and it's one you kind of take for granted until you start looking at the cookbooks. And it seems like fruit pies, or just sweet pies, in the time period really were usually tarts. Lower, flatter little pies, and they didn't tend to have top crusts. They didn't make, just in general at least, big thick fruit pies like we're used to today. Although you definitely get a lot of savory pies, which we don't do as many of, and they would put fruit in them, so they didn't have as much trouble with mixing sweet and savory as we do today. Although I think you see more sweet and savory getting mixed into our palate today than maybe 10 or 20 or 50 years ago. But in the time period, they would definitely mix that sweet and savory. Sometimes they would even just put sugar in a meat pie as a seasoning. And you would definitely see things like the Cheshire pork pie, which have apples in it. So it's much more common to see that mix. And fruit pies usually were fruit tarts. Hey, and a quick shout out to Neil Nutter in Parkersburg, West Virginia. I really want to encourage you in this really challenging time that you're having, and I want to thank you for sharing these videos with your brother Eric. And I've got a real quick question for you. If you're a reenactor or somebody who's in living history, what I'd really like to know is, how has living history or reenacting changed your life? And I want to thank everyone out there for your wonderful questions, for your amazing comments, for your support and your sharing our videos. Thank you so much for everything you do, and thanks for watching.
Hi, I'm Warren Ford. I traveled to Pierceton, Indiana to visit with Townsend and Son. We traveled from Fayetteville, Alabama, and it met our expectations and even more. So I suggest that you take a trip to Pierceton, Indiana, and check them out.